We've talked about some of this stuff before on the channel, but there are right wingers out there in the UK who are insistent that already the UK has lost its rights and that things like, critical race theories being taught in schools, the whole national trust daring to actually teach about history of how certain things and homes were built in the UK. Oh, can't have that. The actual teaching about what, again, Winston Churchill actually thought in his actual books, in his own words, again, apparently not too allowed. But of course, this is all just the fun and games, the pantomime show of what is really going on behind the scenes. Because I've said many, many times before, you have these people who claim that they are for freedom of speech and that they are trying to defend the rights of the people, the UK, on YouTube, being right wingers, while at the same time supporting bills that are currently in the House of Lords that are easily some of the most repressive laws the UK has ever passed in recent memory, and have very, very worrying undertones for anyone who is at least cognizant of 20th century history. So all of this is really, really worrying. And it's today, again, we turn to across the pond to have a look at this piece in the New York Times, which gets it exactly right. Boris Johnson is revealing who he really is. He's a libertarian who is striking for freedom of the country and to take back control, while at the same time taking liberty of all those below him. So, as before we do go jumping into this, please remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and an invitation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can, well, buy me a coffee. And as always, thank you very much for all those watching. And of course, I must remind people, today, I'm doing this later, but we are still in Boris Watch today. So we're gonna have. I don't know if this might even still be viable by the time this video comes out tomorrow. But like I say, we are on Boris Watch. But who knows what could happen in the next 24 to 48 hours? So let's dive into this then. So this comes from the New York Times with the title of "Boris Johnson is revealing who he really is." Prime Minister Boris Johnson of Britain is bruised by scandal and faced with an alarming rise in coronavirus cases, is refusing to change course. Why have a change, he bullishly proclaimed on January the 4th, to ride out this Omicron wave without shutting down our country once again. Public health experts may disagree, yet Mr. Johnson is just the latest, is at least being consistent. Not only with his current thought of the pandemic, where lockdowns were indeed the last resort and restrictions were to be shelved as soon as possible, but also with the political platform that elevated him to the highest office. After all, this is the man who rose to power, bringing about Brexit in the process, on the promise to restore freedom and take back control. Undeterred by the pandemic, Mr. Johnson has been quietly pursuing that agenda. And instead of reforming the country's creaking democracy and trying to shore up Britain's rights, he and his lieutenants are doing the exact opposite, seizing control for themselves and stripping away the freedom of others. A raft of bills likely to pass this year will set Britain, the self-professed beacon of democracy, on the road to autocracy. Once in place, the legislation will be very hard to shift. And for Mr. Johnson, it amounts to a concerted power grab. It is also an answer. Mr. Johnson is a political chameleon, and his true ideological bent is either liberal or a one nation Tory, an English nationalist, has long been the subject of speculation. He now has, beyond any doubt, revealed who he really is, a British authoritarian who puts his personal whims above anything else, whether his future Britain will be remade in his image. Amid the chaos wrought by this pandemic, the Brexit turbulent and increasingly questions about the stability of Mr. Johnson's individual position, the full scale of the impending assault on civil liberties has understandably not yet come into focus for much of the British public. The list of obviously the legislation is indeed long and deliberately overwhelming. But when pieced together, the picture is very bleakly repressive. First of all, there is the Police, Crime and Sentencing and Courts Bill, a draconian and indeed broad piece of legislation that effectively bans protest in England and Wales. The police will be equipped to shut down demonstrations that create serious disruption. Those who break this condition could be done uh, with just by making noise without facing prison sentences or even hefty fines. Combined with other measures such as outlawing traditional direct action tactics like locking on, the bill could eventually make it almost impossible to attend a demonstration without committing an offence. Yet, this goes beyond protest, putting minority groups in the crosshairs. New trespass provisions, which make residing on land without consent or within a vehicle, make it a criminal offence. And this could completely erase the nomadic gypsy, Roma, and traveller communities from public life. And the expansion of police powers would not only allow officers widespread access to public education and healthcare records, but also pave the way for, suspiciousless stop and search. Ethnic minority communities are disproportionately signalled out for police attention. They are likely to indeed bear the brunt of such overreach. Similarly, the very punitive ones of the National and Borders Bill is indeed stiffening Britain's already hawkish immigration policy and seeks to criminalise asylum seekers who undertake unsanctioned routes. Refugees who arrive by boat, for example, could face up to 4 years in prison, regardless of their validity of their claim for safe haven. And if claimants escape traditional jail, they could be kept in a concentration camp housing style offshore processing centres, sites long denounced by human rights activists. Not even British citizens are even safe from this dragnet. A provision slipped into the bill in November by its architect, the Home Secretary Priti Patel, would endow the government with power to remove British citizenship from dual nationals without notice. Those signalled out might not even have a recourse in the law. The proposed reform of the Human Rights Act would also make it easier for the government to deport foreign nationals and deny their claims of mistreatment. Such draconian measures in time are sure to be contested, but the government has a plan for that. Draining the lifeblood from democracy, there's the election bill, which, alongside the potentially disenfranchising millions through the introduction of mandatory voter ID, aims to furnish the government with new powers over the independent elections regulator, sealing up the political process. Unless substantially amended, the bill could have constitutionally far-reaching consequences. The urge to centralise power also underlines the radical judicial review and courts bill, which could also enable Mr. Johnson and his ministers to overrule judicial reviews findings that challenge their agenda. The online safety bill, ostensibly designed to regulate big tech, is yet another introduced to Parliament. But many free speech advocates fear that this could be used to silence critics on social media, censoring reporting details that Mr. Johnson's government would rather keep from public view. No more pesky judges or overtly inquisitive journalists interfering with government business. It's a truthism that while nations sleepwalk into tyranny, and England, the most politically powerful of the nations that make up Britain, is no exemption. For decades, it has possessed all the necessary ingredients: the ever more spiteful nationalism, the press fearfully sold to the highest bidder, and fervently misplaced belief that the authoritarianism could never set up shop here because we simply wouldn't let it. In this event, through the concerted opposition to Mr. Johnson's plans, has not materialised. Establishment policies have been no match for the determination of Mr. Johnson and his allies. A hefty and largely supportive Conservative majority means that even when the Labour Party has decided to oppose the legislation, the votes have just barely counted. And despite valiant efforts by a coalition of grassroots and individual groundswell like Kill the Bill protests, the mass movement opposing these bills has failed to come together. Instead, a miasma of grim inevitability has now set in. And that's dangerous, not because this authoritarian assault is so comprehensive that once settled as law, it will prove very tricky to unpick. Like many leaders who seek to transcend the constraints of democracy, Mr. Johnson may not foresee a future where he isn't the one calling the shots. But the miserable shadow of his power grab will cast over Britain and is likely to last far more longer than the tenure of the would-be world king himself. His place in the history books, however, is secured. He will forever be the libertine whose pursuit of personal freedom and control saw his countrymen robbed of theirs. And that's, again, the reality that we are unfortunately living in. We have all these bills that have been passed through, again, with this massive conservative majority, which we were always worrying about from the very start. A lot has gone under the radar, not been talked about, not been, or when it has been talked about, it hasn't really been making the news that it should be. And yet all those bills that we've just ran through there are incredibly worrying. Incredibly worrying, because once they're in, it's going to be incredibly hard to get rid of them. And even if they are challenged in courts, you saw at the end there that final judicial reform bill that's coming through. Boris and his ministers can just outrightly just ignore any rulings. This is incredibly worrying. And yet, again, where are all these free speech advocates, all these rights advocates that were seemingly all over the place? Well, I'll tell you where they are now. They're all right wingers who are saying what Boris Johnson is doing, yeah, perfectly fine. And yeah, we are incredibly worried about this and the direction this could take, because at the moment it's Boris Johnson, a man who, well, doesn't have a clue. But what if you get, again, another Tory who really knows how to use these laws to good effect, that could essentially just start stifling protest, censoring freedom of speech, stopping any, shall we say, of these information getting out? For example, we've just had Partygate rumble on yet again. Under these new rules and laws, the government could just censor that information completely. What, and we've completely sleepwalked into authoritarianism. Completely. And of course, these bills are currently in the House of Lords, and we hope maybe some of these will be amended and get sent back to the Commons. Maybe there'll be an eternal game of tennis of batting these bills back because they're just that bad. We can only hope. But like I say, with this big conservative majority, it's only a matter of time until these bills passed, or they just decide to just bypass the Lords altogether to get these bills through. And once they're into law, even if Labour should come into power, which, again, when you look at how the voting intentions are at the moment, even if Starmer gets in with a very slim majority, getting these bills unpicked is going to be very, very hard. Very, very hard indeed. And it sets a very, very worrying course for the future of this country. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.